Welcome to another episode of A Come Together. One. All right, welcome. We're live. Here we are. Hello. So happy you're doing this. I really, really appreciate it, especially last minute, just like out of the blue, like literally out of nowhere. What was your reaction when Barry told you that I that I asked about a podcast?
Honestly, I was surprised. First of all, I think it's great that you have a podcast because I'm a huge podcast goer myself. I listen to a lot. I've never done one. So I was like, wow, that is so cool. And also super honored to be asked to be on here.
It's so much fun. Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, I mean, it's good because what do you, I just anyone that I know or that I think is interesting based on anything that they do, their profession or their lives, or people that I just know from the past. I've been hitting them up, and it starts off a lot more fun, I think, than what people think. Like, so it starts off like a lot of fun with a lot of energy, and then like after the first like 10 or 5, even like like guests or trying like attempts to reach out to people, you're like, oh man, this kind of it's kind of hard to do. And then
Yeah.
and then the energy burns out pretty quickly, so you have to be pretty disciplined to keep it up, or you have to be willing to at least put the time into it or the work into it. But um but I feel like, but I really love like every episode that I do. So it's really rewarding in the sense that it's just fun, and I always walk away afterward just feeling like I'm so happy I did that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the goal, right? Do anything that you love and do it fully
Yeah,
and just
yeah, and
enjoy
try to build
it.
that up and try to build. So yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and catch me up on a little bit what you've been up to in the last couple of years in
Yeah,
terms of
absolutely.
your career, or work, life, whatever.
Yeah, it feels like the last couple of years have been like one really long journey. So I have my doctorate in clinical psychology.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. That is recent. I graduated, well, officially got my degree in December. So it's a little weird to try and refer to myself as doctor, but I have it finally.
Mm, it's so exciting. Is
Uh,
that weird for you?
yeah. It is, because I think as a student, you're constantly coached to say, you're a therapist in training, right? You don't yet have your degree. And now I have finally arrived at this moment. So it's a little strange. I think it's an adjustment, but I am really excited to be at this point in my career. So, like I mentioned, I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I'm currently working at a major hospital here in Los Angeles called Cedars-Sinai, and working specifically in their reproductive psychology program. So, I'm working with women, caregivers who are going through different sort of pathways in their reproductive journey. Basically, that can look like pregnancy, trying to get pregnant and start a family, infertility, pregnancy loss. So it really kind of runs the gamut of so many different things. But
Was that what you had in mind when you got started, or did you kind of fall into it, or how that
no,
happened?
yeah, it's such a good question because if I gave you my resume and you looked at all the experiences I had up until this point, it would make no sense how I arrived here. Um, I pretty much started out in this field as a case manager, just trying to get some experience. And I worked specifically with parolees and thought that I was going to run with that, go into forensic psychology, and then did a huge pivot once I got into my doctoral program and started working with kids and teens. And pretty much stayed with that up until my last year of grad school, where I was completing my internship in this community mental health setting. And I was also pregnant and gave birth to my daughter at that time. And that just sort of launched me into this whole new world of motherhood and career and what does that even look like, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it was somewhere in trying to find the balance between those two things that I really kind of fell in love with this specific part in the field of perinatal mental health.
Okay, there's a bajillion follow-up questions, follow-up
Sure,
questions and
sure,
thoughts
sure.
I'm thinking of throughout the whole thing. First of all, I'm just so interested. So so you originally wanted to get into criminology and forensic psychology,
Yeah,
and what was
exactly.
the just because you thought that was cool? Was there a motivation? Was it TV shows that
Yeah.
you like watched? Was it what
Oh,
was it?
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I was like a Law and Order fanatic, first of all.
Nice.
So I thought that was always super cool, but never thought that I would be able to be a cop or had like the like the stamina to do something like that. Um, and then I think, being able to work with this really unique population of people who are kind of coming out of the prison system and trying to reintegrate in their communities, that was super rewarding. And I really enjoyed helping these people make that transition because, it's a really vulnerable time. You're pretty often judged, and it's a hard transition to do. And so being there and being able to support them in that, I felt was really rewarding at the time. I was kind of doing the things that I felt like a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think to do in that field.
Yeah,
And so I felt
sure.
like that is something I wanted to stick with.
So
Um,
what kind of at this point this was an internship, or was this
no,
classes?
this
What
was
was this?
before. Yeah, this was before everything. So basically, I finished college, really wanted to get experience in the field, was told by professors how hard it was to do that because I wasn't, I didn't have any like sort of certification or license or anything.
Yeah,
So it's hard
yeah.
to get experience, but you also have to get experience to go to
Yeah,
school
get that
and do all
certification, the
that.
license, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So I was really, really lucky in that I had two wonderful mentors here in LA, and they sort of pinpointed me to a program where I could get some experience and do some volunteer work. And that actually eventuated in like a full-time job doing this
Awesome.
particular
And
thing. Yeah.
what was there an age group? What kind of like what was the company or the I guess the place they were working? What kind of clientele were they gearing themselves towards?
Yeah, it was basically a community mental health organization. They were specifically working with people who were finishing out their sentences. So they were out on parole, finishing their sentences out in the community. These were primarily, I want to say, like, individuals who were in like their late 50s, 60s, some as old as 70, who
Wow.
had served like long sentences. So people who had been in prison between like anywhere like 5 to 15, potentially more years. So they were coming out and like coming out to a completely different world where,
Sure.
they didn't really have a lot of the technology that we have today back then. So they were getting reoriented to a world that was so different from the one that they left when they went in.
Sure. Sure.
Hmm.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. By the way, I think I think we throw out numbers when it comes to prison time, like very casually, but oh yeah, they were just in prison for 10 years. Like 10 years ago, if you think about like what you were like
Hmm.
that's a long time. Like that's a huge chunk of someo's life,
It
and
is.
I'm not
It
even saying,
is.
the question aside as to whether or not it's deserved is almost like that's not the point. The point is like what happens in those 10 years, like do they kind of just melt apart, like melt away because it's the same thing every day, or is it a life that they build up and they get used like and then you get let out after you build yourself up? I've thought about that before. The truth is I think you're one of the I actually was supposed to record this past week with with a woman at University of Miami. She pushed it off for a little bit, but she's the head of criminology and sociology, the undergrad program at University of Miami.
Oh,
And
wow.
some of her research that she did was she was working more with adolescents and youth in criminology, and studying both the relationship between organized sports and likelihood of getting arrested, or or I guess breaking laws and crime, and also between parents that encourage or didn't encourage risky behavior,
Mhm.
and whether that would have some kind of relationship to whether or not the kid ended up more or less inclined to break any kind of laws. um, I'm very excited to talk to her. I just have we just she just emailed me the last minute that she had to push it off a week. So I've always been so interested in that. So how long were you working there for?
Yeah, I was there for about almost a year. And then, right around the time that I was wrapping up, I got into my master's program and was going to, pretty much go full time into that and really focus as a student. So I ended up being done about after a year, went into my master's. And then, when I was in my master's, about I think a year in, I did an internship at a different community mental health setting and then
Hmm.
started working with adults and older adults with like chronically mentally ill sort of diagnoses and co-occurring substance use disorder. So still kind of not completely far off from what I was doing. A lot of these people had had different experiences, whether within the legal system or out, but
Hmm.
it was just a much broader sort of population that I was working with at that point.
And when you say these kind of mental health disorders or whatever, you're talking intensive like schizophrenia or bipolar, or we're talking like or when you say, is it addiction as in just like trying to recover? Like what kind of people what adults are you working with?
Yeah, absolutely. So at that point, I was working with like the spectrum of different diagnoses. So anywhere between depression, anxiety, could be bipolar, definitely schizophrenia, as well as some other kind of associated disorders like schizoaffective. Um, there were definitely some people who experienced a lot of PTSD in their life. And
Sure.
then a lot of the time, what we see with these sort of mental health diagnoses, I mean, not all, but definitely people who've been struggling for a very long time try to find different ways to cope. And some of the time, we see that through substance use. So some of them did have co occurring substance use disorders.
Right, 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 right. And what was that? What was that like? What was that experience? Was it ever? Was it uncomfortable? Was it always in a controlled setting? Was it? Did you feel like you were able to like really be effective? Like what was the environment like?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that because, I'm looking back from now years of experience in the field. So if you
Uh
ask me now, was I
huh.
was I effective? I don't know how effective I was then. I mean, I like to hope that I was supportive and someone that these people could talk to and have some kind of emotional relief through. But
Sure.
yeah, I was still really young back then. And I think that's partially why I felt like I needed more after my master's program. I didn't feel like it was enough for me to just go out into the world and start doing therapy. I really wanted to learn more and really hone my skills. So, I mean, it was a great learning experience. I had great supervisors and really so much exposure to different kinds of people with different kinds of challenges. But I think in terms of like me as a therapist, there was a lot more to learn and to grow from at that point.
Right, right. But I bet it was a great experience for you to get even just to know that. Like
Oh yeah.
I think a huge part of, I guess, education in general, or like learning your way in the world, is kind of like dipping your toe in the water and then being like, "There's a lot more. There's a lot more here than I thought
Hmm.
there was," you know. And you're like,
Hmm.
and again, you
Yeah,
know, yeah. But and if you're interested in this, if it's something that you're interested in, then it's exciting and it's engaging. And if it's not something you really want to do, then it's like, and I feel like it's enormously overwhelming. Or at least that's been my experience.
absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think I could have gone through so many years of grad school if I wasn't totally dedicated, passionate about what I was doing, because otherwise that would be a huge drag.
It would be
It's not
terrible,
easy.
right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hard work. It's really hard work and it takes time, dedication, financial resources. I mean, it's not an easy journey to go through at all, but it's definitely rewarding, especially if you're passionate about what you're doing.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about, because I keep on going back and forth about whether or not I want to go back to school, because I've always really been extremely interested and driven by psychology. And I would and I would love to kind of have a little bit more of a formal relationship to it, or more, professional relationship to it, as other than just being interested in talking to people about it or reading about it. But every single time I think about it, I'm like, I don't know if I could like bring myself to go back to school for another X amount of years. And I don't know, again, the financial resources, the time, it's so much. And then I think to myself also, like, at the end of the day, like, time is passing by one way or
Hmm.
the other. And like,
Hmm.
I could be, like, I'll be turning 30, I mean, I'm turning 30 next year. Before I blink, I'm sure I'll be 35. And the time I'll have passed, I'm 35 between now and then anyway. So,
Hmm.
why shouldn't I go for it, But,
Absolutely.
um,
Yeah. And
yeah,
you'll never regret investing in yourself. I think
yeah,
that's
that's the other thing.
really key.
That's the other thing. Yeah. I tell my wife that because my wife is 4 years younger than me.
Hmm.
And when we got married, she just turned 22. I was 26. And I told her, and she wanted to go to PA school. She wasn't sure. She wanted to do something in the medical field. And I told her, I was like, well, if you want, you could think about ultrasounds because I sell ultrasound machines for a living. And I was like, and you can, kind of do your own practice. And she always loved OBGYN and like birth, the whole birthing process and women's health. And so I said, you could be a sonographer, you could have your own business, you could work your own hours, you could do your own thing if you want to try it. And I was like, and worst comes to worst, like if you go to school and you don't like it, like you just don't like it and you do something else. Like, I mean, by the time if you finish school now, you'll be 24 when you finish. That's plenty of time to figure out what else you want to do with yourself. So I was like, just keep, it's like try it. If you don't like it, then try something else and you won't regret, having tried it at least. It's worth it. Um, and she's doing it. So I guess it's a good
Oh,
thing.
that's
But
awesome.
we'll see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which is where she is now. She's doing a 3D 4D. She's working at a 3D 4D studio in Miami or in Western Miami. But I'm like, I sell machines. I get you a machine, and there's no reason why you can't go around to all your friends that are expecting here. There's like constantly people in the neighborhood, thank God, that are
Hmm.
expecting, and like, and it also helps with the relationship with the community. It helps. It's like a
Oh,
bonding
yeah.
experience, and I was like, it's just good for you in every way, possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there's nothing better than having that strong sense of community because at the end of the day, like, I mean, that's the way I was able to get as far along as I have. I think obviously with some hard work and, dedication, but also with a lot of support from other people. And it's so important.
Yeah, and it's also amazing much, how much people are willing to do for other people if you just ask. If you just like open your
Yeah.
mouth a little bit, and you just like I've noticed that over the years because like when I was graduating Binghamton with my creative writing degree, which was obviously not the most useful or applicable degree.
To be fair, my husband also graduated from
Another
Binghamton with a creative writing degree.
Yeah, of course. I know. We
You're
took a
not
bunch of the same
alone.
classes. I know. But he was always a little bit. He's more ambitious and more of a hustler than I am. He is a little bit less. I get more in my head about introducing myself to people and kind of making those connections, and he's way better about it than I am. Um, so
Mm.
I knew everyone always knew that he'd be just fine regardless of what degree he got, right? um,
Yeah, he definitely is
but
a hustler.
yeah, but I'm losing my train. Oh yeah, but then so then I just started reaching out to people when I was trying to get an internship or kind of get my foot into any kind of industry, and I would just reach out to random Binghamton alumni on LinkedIn, and just say, hi, I'm a Binghamton alumni. I would love to just connect and hear about your job, and like an insane amount, like an insane percentage of people would get back to me quickly with like, hey, let's hop in a phone call. I'm so excited. That sounds awesome. And I'm like, sweet, and like I was like, all I had to do was ask, and I feel like that's like it's a really cool opportunity that people don't take enough advantage of in general is the whole alumni base or any kind of community that you've been in your life to just open your mouth and just say, hey, what's going on? Can you walk me through this or can you tell me a little bit about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that I really love also about my field, particularly, is that people are really invested in growing the next generation of therapists, psychologists, right, mental health workers. So I don't think I've ever been turned down from like a learning opportunity because people have always just been super open to providing that support. And I think that's also just, like you said, people just don't take, um, they don't think about it, like they I think they expect the worst before,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
they even go for it. And
Yeah,
you know
that's what holds me back most of the time is I'm expecting no's, and so I don't even bother asking.
Mhm, mhm, and you never know, people might just say yes. And like I said before, I think that's a huge part of how I've been able to go as far as I have. And then of course, like, definitely had other people in my environment who were super supportive and allowed me to like take the time, invest in my career, invest in myself. And yeah,
It's
a lot to
awesome.
be
So
grateful for.
you got your master's and
Mhm,
you say, okay, I think I need a little bit more experience. I think I need do a little bit more. Do you go to
mhm.
working or you go straight to your doctorate?
No, I went straight to my doctorate. And it's funny because it wasn't the first time I applied for a doctorate. I actually applied before I got into my master's. I applied for doctorates all over, but really fell in love with one particular program out in LA and thought, hey, if I like this and I want more, it's a perfect sort of kind of fit because then I'll just transition into their doctoral program. And
Oh,
it
that's
ended up
so
being that
cool.
case. Yeah. So
And that
I
was the
kind of
master's
took
program that you were in
that was the
before the
master's program
doctorate?
I was in.
Okay, gotcha. And what was your master's
Yeah.
degree in?
It was, in marriage and family therapy. So,
Cool.
yeah. Yeah. So pretty much, like, all really similar sort of genre, so to speak. But then I got into the doctoral program and I started and I took a complete pivot in terms of like the kind of people I was thinking about working with, the kind of work that I really enjoyed. And I got paired. And so the way my doctoral program worked was that it was an accelerated program. So everybody was coming in with a master's degree of some sort and it was 4 years. So the first 3 years are a combination of like didactic courses and also clinical experience. So you're doing what we call like a practicum placement, which is kind of like an internship, but like on a smaller level because you're only doing part time. And then your last year, which is your fourth year, you're doing like a big clinical internship. And that's something that it's kind of like how medical doctors get matched to like their residencies. We go through the same kind of match. So it's a kind of a big deal. People don't realize it's really, really stressful. But you basically
When you
do this
match,
big
you're matching
internship.
for what? For internships or for what?
So you
Internships.
basically the same way that like a medical doctor would apply for a residency like all over the country, you're competing against people all over the country for a specific spot at this placement, at this internship in order to complete your degree. So that's what I had to do during my fourth year. And luckily I was able to stay in LA. I didn't really give myself much of a choice. I only applied to places in LA,
Good.
which was a
Right.
tad risky, but I had to do it. And
Well, the
then
alternative is uprooting your life, right?
Exactly, and that's a big choice, especially when you're thinking about starting a family and you have all your resources and people that you know and your
Yeah, sure,
environment
sure.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big change. So, my program was like that, and so yeah, that very first year, I started working with kids and teens and families, and that just completely changed my trajectory moving forward.
How so? What were some of the moments that can you give like moments that you could pinpoint that were like, oh yeah, wow, like this really I love this or this really made me rethink things?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really enjoyed working with people at the point of being able to support them early on before things escalated, right? So, like, I think a lot of the time when you think about mental health, you think about people who come to your office and they're already struggling, they're already kind of deep in the the ditch, so to speak, right? And what I really enjoyed was I got to be that person that stepped in while these people were really young and provide them with support that hopefully shifted their pathway from, you know, more struggles in the future and kind of just help them to shift to a place that was a little bit more balanced and a little bit more hopeful. So I think I just really enjoyed being able to do that sort of early intervention work and appreciated, yeah, just being able to be that person who could create that level of impact early on in someone's life. I didn't have to wait for someone to come to my door and just really be so far along in their mental health struggles that it was almost too difficult, right, to help them change or shift things around. It was more hopeful in some ways, if that
That's
makes
awesome.
sense.
Yes, yeah, it does. It makes total sense because I mean, why do you want to wait for the sickness to set in before you start preparing yourself for it? You know, like I
Mm,
mean, you even talk about like people like I mean, the people that, eat well or stay in shape or get good sleep and take care of themselves generally speaking, if and when they do get sick, they tend to recover better because they're prepared for it. They have the groundwork laid out, and I'm sure the same thing applies mentally or emotionally, and
mhm.
and I think it's important to get those tools, like like you're saying, like to have those tools before disaster strikes, and to say, I already know, because I don't think there's any moments. and life is always hard, you know, and whether
Mhm.
it's hard to the point where you have full-blown anxiety or depression or whatever, you know, that probably comes with different, you know, catastrophic or intensive moments in people's lives. But, you know, until then, there are plenty of things to still learn how to navigate, you know, go, you know, school, friends, friendship, family, you know, maturing, getting older, finding your place in the world and your, you know, the point in your life and all this kind of stuff. I feel like, you know, all those things are things that on generally people's minds anyway. Um, have you do you notice correlations between you know mental, you know, I guess mental health and social media or phone use and stuff like that? Is that anything that you've observed or worked on, or is that, do you notice that in passing or anything?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you mention it because I think actually my dissertation was on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on adolescent mental health. And one of the things that I looked at
Wow.
was social media and kind of what was the role there? Was it helpful? Was it actually detrimental to some of these kids who were kind of going through it already? And I guess it's hard to say. The research is sort of split, right? You know, if you're going to be on social media to an extreme, you kind of give yourself you kind of exposed yourself to like all of the things you would think, right? So like you know, online bullying, right? You know, a lot of self-comparison, kind of isolation from other people because you're really online, you're not in person. But then there's the other side of it, right? Which in a time kind of like the pandemic, it's a huge connector, right? It's a huge source of support. You can speak with your friends even though you're social distancing. You can join online communities for people who can support you if you're going through a very particular and unique struggle. So I think social media definitely can play a difficult and challenging role, especially when you're young. We know that there's just so much that kids go through in terms of comparing themselves to other people, where they are in their lives, what they have, what they don't have. But on the whole, right, it can also be a really useful tool. So it's kind of split.
Yeah, I remember. I actually remember making that argument back in the day when I first wanted to make a Facebook account, right? And I was in, I think, ninth or tenth grade. And the first time I asked my mom, she said no, just flat out. And then the second time I asked her, she said no again, flat out. And then the third time I did, she was like, "Listen, like if you want it, you're gonna have to really tell me what the point of it is and why you want, like what you want to use it for." Um,
Mm,
you know, and I had to, and I really had to think about it. And I said, well, you know, and then I didn't have a good answer at first, and I had to come back with her a couple of months later, actually after my first time at sleepaway camp. And I was like, well, the reason I do want it now is because I have all these friends from Chicago, and I have all these friends from LA, and I have all these friends from Florida that I typically, you know, that I wouldn't be able to keep in touch with or talk to. That you know, it's really good for useful for connecting. Um, I kind of BS that answer, and I really ended up paying for it on like from a mental health place actually. At
mm,
that time, I really was not secure enough for myself, and so whenever anything was happening on social media with these friends, you know, that I felt like I wasn't included in, like it would just break me. You know, it
yeah.
was so hard, and at one point I had one very difficult time where, and I remember the day. I don't even remember what it was or why I was so upset, but I just remember feeling devastated. And it was about maybe it was definitely, there's definitely a girl that I liked, I'm sure, associated, and then, you know, maybe with another group of friends, and I wasn't getting as much attention from that girl of that group of friends on Facebook, and I was so, and I was so upset, and I thought to myself, I don't I don't know. I had this split reaction where as a 14-year-old I cared so much. And then I was thinking to myself, like, why am I freaking out right now? Like, but I couldn't control it. I
Mhm.
couldn't help it, you know? And it was and my parents had no, my mom and my dad just had no idea what to do. And like I took down all the posters in my room and I took down the pictures of myself and my friends, and I was so upset about it. And I just felt like everything was stupid, you know? And then it was really tough, and my parent and my mom didn't know what to do, you know. And so I guess at the end of the day, you know, you know, all that comparing was definitely not good for me. You know, it definitely wasn't good. You know, I mean, and and it gave me an enormous amount of, you know, the dopamine release when I would get tagged with friends, or get a post
Mm.
with a lot of likes or a lot of comments on it, or a good thread, and and some references in person to something I said online that was funny, and like that was all great, but it just, I mean, some of the most painful experiences from my teenagehood, I guess, is from both broken hearts and from those social media experiences.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we don't really do a whole lot of like education around the dangers of social media with kids. And it because it's such a solitary, sort of isolated experience, meaning they're on their own accounts. Parents may or may not have access or like understand what's really going on in their world. They go through this stuff alone a lot of the time. And it's tough when I hear stories like yours. It makes you wish that someone would have been able to be there to say, hey, this could be a really fun thing that you do, but also, no, it doesn't mean everything.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. Wait, I'm sorry, Ruth. 1 second, okay? I'm so sorry.
No
Just
worries. No worries.
can you repeat that last sentence one more time, please?
Sure. I was just saying that, when I hear stories like yours, it makes me think about what difference it would have made for someone to be able to step in and say, hey, while social media can be great, it could be such a useful tool, you can connect with people, also, it doesn't have to be everything, mean everything,
Yeah,
in life. It
yeah,
doesn't have to
yeah.
have this huge impact. And, what difference that would have made if we had had more education about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to my friends so many times about how we're gonna look back in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and be like, you let your kid, or people would say to our parents, like, you let your kid just go on Instagram as like without any kind of guardrails whatsoever at like 10, like
Mhm.
what, and like we're gonna like look back at our generation, like what kind of crazy people were you for having this unfiltered, unhinged, and like I've said this before when I was with different guests, but like I almost feel like it's not a it's I'm certain that it's not a fair fight. You have a 12-year-old, a 15 and 16-year-old, and they don't even realize that they're up in a fight against the some of the most powerful companies and people and talented people in the world at
Mm,
trying to keep
mhm,
their attention, and they don't know that they're even engaging in this fight. And so
mhm.
like how are they supposed to protect themselves or defend themselves from it, and
Right,
like,
right.
how many people how many psychologists does Facebook, hire? How many marketing people does Facebook hire? How many, behavioral psychologists do they hire to keep you invested? And what is a 16-year-old prepared to handle that with,
Mhm, mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a wild world that we're living in, and the way all the connectivity, as much as we hope that it brings us closer, it can also really drive us apart. So,
Yeah.
it's definitely something to handle with moderation for sure.
So you loved the family therapy.
I did. I loved working with kids and with teens, young adults as well. Just like any transition period where people were about to like launch into the next sort of stage of life, right?
Yeah.
Adolescence, there's so much going on there. Young adulthood, so much going on there. So I just felt like those were moments where I could, really intellectualize, really speak with clients, with different people that I was working with, understand what it was they wanted and what their hopes were for the future, and kind of help to be that sort of supportive person as they were, trying to
Sure.
accomplish those goals. So it was really lovely. I really, and I still till today love that work. But I think just when I became a mom, things kind of
Yes, which I want
shifted
to talk
again.
about too, for sure. Yes, definitely. Yes. I mean, women's health, or I guess, women's health is really in a wild state these days.
Mm,
Um, I was never really obviously aware of it until obviously, I started my own family, and my siblings and my wife's siblings and family and our friends started, having, starting, start trying and start to have their own families. And
mhm,
aside from like the physical things like PCOS and miscarriages and stuff like that, it's such an enormous toll, and I feel like it's such an enormous um, there's a whole world that people just are not aware about, of the motherhood journey, from
Yeah.
trying to first stages of pregnancy, and then later, and then when after you give birth and recovery and postpartum, and then just the transition and balancing everything. Um, and I know, for example, I have a family member, just a relatively distant family member, but that you know, she needed therapy before starting to get pregnant, before trying, and it was going through therapy all the way through because it was such a traumatic notion for her, and then she needed a couple of years and kept going to therapy through it until she was able to have her second, but it really took it was like monumental work, I mean, it was an enormous
Mhm.
amount of work for her. And what are some of your thoughts and experiences and everything on all this?
I mean, I think you really hit it on the nail. People really do not know, or maybe just don't talk about how difficult this whole reproductive journey can be, right? And I think what's tough about that is that it can be such an isolating experience, especially for, women who are going through this, caregivers who are going through this for the first time. Our only frame of reference, right, are the people that, gave birth to us or the people around us who
Sure.
who were our
Yeah.
caregivers, right? But even they can't really tell you what it was like because you're usually asking and it's like however many years down the line. I remember I asked my mom, what can I expect from birth? And she's like, ah, you'll be fine. and and I was fine. She was right. And I know that that's not the same experience for so many women, right? So many
Sure.
different things can happen, right? It's a wild time because anything could happen at any point of that sort of journey, whether you're trying to get pregnant and it's not really going well, or maybe you got pregnant and then you had an early miscarriage, right? Or even,
Yeah.
God forbid, carried all the way
I
to
think it's
term.
25% of I think 25% of pregnancies end in miscarriages at this point, or something like that,
It's
right?
so common, and people don't know how often women miscarry. Some women don't even know that they miscarry, and some
Mm-hmm.
women miscarry and they're like, why me? Right? Like, why did this
Yeah.
happen to
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
Um, and don't even realize that actually this happens to so many people. I'll share, like, I miscarried too when I was starting trying to have a family. And I remember that being like a really difficult time because I asked a whole all sorts of questions like what did I do that led to
Yeah.
this? What was sort of like the equation that, produced this outcome? And the truth is there's so many reasons why this happens. It's hard to pinpoint any one, and it's not our fault, right? I think a lot of women kind of go through this sort of feeling or thought process of, I had something to do with it. It was my fault. And it's just not the case. But unfortunately,
Why do you think that
there,
is? Why do you think people feel
yeah.
that?
Well, I mean, some people feel really let down by their body. Some people feel like, if they're healthy, they take care of themselves, then they've done everything that they can to prepare. And so they expect a certain outcome. But I think we just don't actually know enough about our bodies and how they work to understand the depth of what is going on when you're creating life. That's something that I definitely didn't know as I was going into this journey. And I had to do a lot of research, a lot of education to help myself understand how this all works, how this all happens, right? I think people just like see on TV like women get pregnant every other day and it's easy, it's on the first try. And that's really
Are you
not the
talking
case.
about like lifestyle? Are you talking about diet? Are you talking about what are you referring
Right.
to when it comes to preparing yourself?
Right. So there's something that's called like preconception wellness, right? So people will, for example, change their diet, change their nutrition, change their, sort of like basic health and lifetime, like lifestyle routines to increase the chances of being able to have a baby. And a lot of people don't realize that certain things, for example, like excessive alcohol use or like not eating right or I don't know, just all these different things that we expose ourselves to that can actually impact your I guess fertility. And we also know that there are plenty of people who get pregnant who don't think about any of these things so intentionally or, so deeply,
Sure.
and they're fine, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that's the thing. It's kind of like this 50-50. I don't know which side of the coin I'm going to land on. And there are things you can do to improve and enhance your chances for sure. But at the same time, there could be a million other things that happen along the way that might make it more difficult or easier. So there's just a lot we don't know about this. I mean, there's a lot that we can do to learn, but a lot that we as women and as people, we're just not socialized to really think about. At least not until the point where you're actually trying to start a family. And then by then you're like, well, I wish I would have known this stuff before. So I guess what I mean is just that there's so much that can happen, so many factors, so many elements. And people don't realize how exhausting it can be when you're trying to start a family, and you might be going through struggles, right? I think that's the other side of this is people don't know. It's not something that people talk about or feel comfortable sharing, not with their friends, sometimes not even with their family. They also get, messages from different people like, oh, just keep trying, it'll happen eventually, or, you can do this and it's going to work out in the end. And to be honest, no one really knows what that looks like.
Yeah.
So it can be kind of an
It also may not be
isolating
what you want to
time.
hear necessarily
Yeah, and
either,
that
I'm
might,
sure.
not, yeah. For all you know, you could have been trying for a whole year, and people say, "Well, when are you having your baby?" So, I think what's so important about this work is being able to support people as they're going through these different parts, right? Not just, getting pregnant, not just being pregnant and, moving through, every trimester, but also what happens at the end, right? When the
Yes.
baby arrives. That's something that people just say. They're like, okay, you did it. You gave birth to a baby, happy family, right? Um, Not so simple. Not so simple. There's a lot
Far
of things
from
that
it.
people can experience, right? I mean, forget just like the sleep deprivation and the exhaustion that you have, right? You're caring for this newborn who's so dependent on you. And there's something so wonderful about this stage, but also there's so many challenges. And I think where I kind of come in in my role as a therapist is that um, I support women who are dealing with the fallout of these sort of expectations that don't come to fruition, right? They
Yeah.
expect that motherhood is going to be this seamless transition. They expect that they're going to have all this abundant energy to care for their little one and that they'll never get tired, never get bored, never get
Burnt
just
out.
emotionally, yeah,
Yeah.
burnt out from this whole thing. And the truth is that's not the case. Any parent who goes through this knows that it's hard work. And there are some people who experience the challenge to such a degree that it's really affecting their everyday functioning. So I
But
see
I
women.
think we're talking about it more than I don't know whether it's just because it's like like it's almost like there's a stage in life that I guess I'm in, so I'm hearing it more. But do you think that you think it's becoming a little bit more of an open conversation, the same way that therapy in general is becoming a lot more open? You think people are more willing to kind of talk about? I guess there's a lot less stigma to talking about these kind of things. Do you think?
I think that where we are today in terms of the conversation is a lot further than where we were years ago, and yet there's still some work to be done, right? So it's not something that can be, oh, excuse me.
No problem.
Sorry about that. Do I think so? Because I think there are still so many people who find themselves in these situations, dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression, and they're like, why me, right? Why is it that I'm going through this? Everyone I know, everyone I see online seems to be doing just fine. And I think that if this was more talked about, just out there more, people would feel or would at least know that they're not alone, right? They would go into this and say, okay, this is something that can happen. Doesn't mean it'll necessarily happen to me, but if it does, I know that I'm not alone. I know that there are people out there who can help. I know there are resources that I can get for myself. And I think that's the thing. People don't even realize that we actually have a lot to offer.
Yeah, yeah. That there's been a yeah, and I think that people are used to suffering alone. I think that's the other thing. I think that people just feel like, natural. Also, I mean, with pregnancy in particular, like it's such an intimate and private thing, and like
Mhm.
it's more personal. It's so personal that like as a husband, I don't get it. Like as a like I do not understand my wife's relationship to the baby right now that that she's carrying. And I can't understand it, like I just don't. But so like I feel like if she feels that it's so personal and like her husband doesn't get it, then like who would get it, and so she might be less inclined to talk about it. And I mean, thank God everything's fine. I'm just talking hypothetically, just in terms of from the perspective of you know kind of being alone with something that's like so intimate with you and so like such a part of you.
Mhm. I will say though on that topic that women are not the only ones who go through this. Their partners, whether that be husband or someone else, any other caregiver who is also part of this journey is also experiencing some of that isolation. Because I think that's something that we also don't talk about is that, if you're going through a pregnancy loss, and you're a man in a relationship and people are maybe they think that the woman is the one who's only grieving or is the only one grieving. That's not necessarily true, right? I mean, people grieve in their own ways. People
Sure,
are
sure.
processing in their own ways. So I think it is important that when we have the conversation about, this whole experience, right, from the beginning of pregnancy all the way through postpartum, both parents are going through it together to different degrees, sure, different experiences,
Yes.
right? But they're both going through it. So I think it is important to have a shout out for the men out there who.
Do you deal with spouses ever in your in
Mhm.
the work you do? Yeah, you do.
I do. I do. I do. Believe it or
Really?
not, sometimes one spouse over the other, and it's not necessarily the birthing parent, might be really struggling in the postpartum period because think about it. I mean, your whole life is changing as you
Sure.
knew it. Your independence that you had before, all of the sort of routines that you had before, life as you knew it is different. And you have all this responsibility all of a sudden on top of whatever responsibilities you already had. This whole person is depending on you, and your spouse, whoever that is depending on you to help them keep it together and to move through this transition in one piece. So I definitely think that it's something that people go through to different degrees, but we're all going through it. We're all kind of in the same storm, so to speak.
I had a full blown like panic attack when my son was born. I was so I, 'cause the exactly what you're describing. I was like, I have no idea what I just signed up for, and I have no idea what I'm going to do right now. And the worst part is like that, at least the way that where I was in my head was, if I screw up any of this, this kid screw up. It's not just me screwing up. It's
Mhm.
like it's his, and it's funny because my wife was induced 2 weeks early. She had a little bit of high blood pressure, and the doctor was like she's 38 weeks full term. Like if your blood pressure is high and there's a chance for preeclampsia, then
Mhm.
may as well just induce right now,
Mhm.
and then it turned out that she started having contractions, and they can't induce if she started having contractions, because it might apparently stress the baby. So we had to wait for her contractions to stop, and then induce her. So we're in the hospital for a little bit longer than what we wanted, a couple of days. But it almost felt like, at least for me, there's a enormous disassociative aspect. Like I thought she was going to be pregnant forever. Like I just thought like that was just going to be our lives. It was like, okay, like you're just pregnant and like you just like you have this belly from now on. Like that's it. Like I didn't think anything was actually going to happen, and it kind of feels that way this time around too. Like Rachel's 8 months in, and
Oh,
yesterday
that's so
she was
exciting.
like,
Shout to that.
yeah, yeah, thank you. It's very exciting. But yesterday she was like, "Wow, I'm getting a lot of contractions." I'm like, "No, no, 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 no." I was like, I got another month to prepare for this." Okay, like I'm not, But when we got to the hospital, and like, so so the doctor said, "Okay, take a nap. It'll be a bunch of hours." We're like, "Okay." So we take a nap, and then we wake up. The doctor comes in the room and checks. Okay, time to go. And I'm on the couch, passed out, and the doctor goes, "Time to go," or the nurse says, "Time to go," and I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa," and they're like, we're not like you're not in the equation over here. We're not asking you whether you're ready to go. We're telling you that the mother's ready to go." And I was like, "Oh, right, right, right." But I was so like that notion, just like the giant life changing event that's about to happen that you don't know,
Mhm.
like at least me, I didn't know that I'd be able to deal with as a dad, or how well I'd be able to deal with it. That was real scary. It was really, really, really scary, and then kind of, and then that experience of like holding the baby for the first time,
Mm.
a lot of the anxiety kind of just washed away. You're just looking at it, you're like, I'm gonna take care of this. I don't know how, but I'm gonna take care of it. And it's gonna be like it went from will I be able to do this to I'm definitely gonna do this. Like I gotta do this. I love this thing so much. It was really a
Mhm.
crazy experience, such a roller coaster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about, not knowing how you were going to do it, but then things kind of falling into place. I think, there is always like that innate feeling of, wow, I love this child. I'm going to do everything I can to protect this child, to do the thing that I need to do as a parent. And right, there's going to be that learning curve along the way. There will be things that you just don't know how to do innately, right? You never learned, you never did them the first time parent. I remember when the first time I tried to give my daughter a bath on my own, I think I had my mother on FaceTime the entire time because I was so nervous. but
Yeah, it's
but at
scary. It's
the
crazy. Like, what if I
it's
drown the thing?
scary. It is, it is. And now, the thought of giving her a bath is like such a joy. And, there are things that you learn along the way, and it's okay not to know in the beginning. I think that's something that they don't give themselves enough slack about. It's okay not to know. You will figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. My house was like, I thank God, like, when Rachel went into labor, she like we called my mom, and she actually got on the next flight to New York, from New York, which was awesome, down to Florida, and and the first thing she did was she went straight to Walmart and Target, and she just got everything that she knew that I would never dream of, and that neither of us would. So like things like baby Tylenol or Motrin, or like diapers or baby cream that I never thought I would need to get, or Neosporin, and just things you didn't have around the house, just as a regular 27, 28 year old and a 24-year old, like you just don't have around, that you wouldn't even know to think of, but that's what we're lucky to have family. And I think that, like you said, we were talking about earlier, the community is just such a good, such a great tool to help us.
Mhm. And I think on that note, something that has been really monumental as I've been kind of sitting in this field for a little while now is that we do not heal in isolation. We really heal within community. And it's just something that is such an important and integral part of any type of healing journey, whether you're healing from a loss, whether you're healing from just a really difficult challenge or struggle. Um, that community aspect, knowing that you can turn to people for support, that's really what brought me to the field. So just wanted
Yeah,
to highlight
yeah,
that for a
definitely.
moment.
I'm curious. I don't know if you've ever learned or experienced anything in terms of school before you continue to the women's health thing more, is do you think that when it comes to people and community, that embodied experiences are way are as important or more important, or doesn't really matter to have like an embodied in-person community experience, or you think it's sufficient to have it online, or to have it like what we're doing now?
Mhm.
Like, is it sufficient for people to
Yeah.
have phone calls and FaceTimes, and that's fine, or do you think that there's something that really ties that makes things stronger and better with
Mm.
embodied being in person?
Yeah, it's a great question. So from a therapist lens, because I've definitely had this question come up in terms of clients who are like, well, is in person best, or will I get the same kind of support, same quality support online? I think there is an argument to say that yes, you can have that embodied experience with someone, even if it's virtual. And there are also people who just don't connect as well that way. And I think it can be really individualized. It's really a sort of personalized experience. I, for one, enjoy both in person and online interactions and feel like I get meaningful connections from people all the time, whether I'm doing it one way or the other. But some other people might not feel that way. I think also it really depends on your environment and the circumstances. If you think about COVID, a lot of people didn't have a choice. They had to kind of make the most out of what they had. So I think we have learned as a society to find connection across technologies, across platforms, and that's partially why you might even have a podcast, right? Is to be able to connect with people in ways that we may not have had prior. But um, I think it comes down to what you personally feel connected to. Um, and
Right.
that might be in person.
Yeah, I feel like it's got to be, or maybe even like a scale, as in like you can't say that the value would be zero or one, but you know you could. I mean, for example, I used to take guitar lessons. I was able to do it on the phone, or I was able to do it in person.
Mm,
And I mean, I guess this is me, just to your point, but I guess my personal experience. But I always felt like the lessons were like I was always learning something, for sure, and like it was always valuable. But I feel like the embodied experiences kind of resonated a little bit more deeply with me, and they kind of became more ingrained. So it wasn't like that the lesson. It wasn't that I didn't learn anything from the lesson, and it wasn't like I wouldn't get anything from telehealth as opposed to in-person health. But
mhm.
just more effective, more or less effective. Like, do you think that if you were to compare a group of kids that were connecting during COVID on FaceTime, that how are those
Mhm.
bonds, relative to
Mhm.
if they spent 2 or 3 years, those 2 or 3 years in school every day with them, and kind of compare the
Yeah.
two and see if there'd be some kind of overarching storyline that's being told.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally hear your point on that. And I do think it probably depends on circumstance, depends on the person themselves. Um, I can say, at least for me, I mean, I went through grad school. For the first portion of my grad school, I went through online. And that was really hard. I mean, talk about trying to do something difficult, and the people who you rely on for support are on the screen, little Zoom boxes, and you have to try
Yeah,
and find a way to like get what you need, whether that's emotionally, physically, like resource wise. And I think it challenged me in ways that I didn't know I was capable of before. And I think that's something that's important about the human experience, is like we are capable of a lot.
we're really
We don't
resilient.
even realize.
Yeah,
We are really resilient. Our threshold for what we can handle gets pushed all the time. And kudos to us, right? That we can do that. And that's not the same for everybody. But yeah, I definitely think like it's an important part of our growth as a society that we can reach and connect to people even just outside of our communities, that we have the capability to do that, because we can also find ways to support people from afar, right?
yeah,
I have family in Israel, and the fact that I can hop on WhatsApp and connect with them, right, is amazing. Whereas many years prior, just to get a phone call out of the country would cost you so much
sure,
money.
it's
If
crazy.
you even had
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
You'd have designated times and like the amount of time that you could speak for. And if you are going to call, you have to have something to say because otherwise you're wasting time and money, like, yeah,
Hmm.
it's definitely awesome. Um, it's really but then when you contrast that experience with, I'm assuming postdoc was, or sorry, I guess your PhD was in person, right?
So my PsyD was actually first year online, and then once COVID kind of simmered down, we started doing partially in person, and that was really great. I really felt I'm a kind of in class learner, so I really enjoyed being in person with a professor in front of me, sitting in the front row. That's how I learn,
Right.
and so I really felt like I got more out of that for sure. Um, and then I guess to answer your question, um, actually, let's piggyback. What was the question again? I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. Yeah, it was just about contrasting and comparing the online experience versus in person for you. And I get so
Yeah.
because you said that because it was good that you showed yourself that you had the tools to be really be able to
Hmm.
learn and to be able to process it and to be able to kind of get what you need to get done virtually. But and it's great that you developed that skill set. Um, but I'm sure you were still happy to be back in person, right? It was still like
Oh yeah,
you
a
felt like it
hundred
was
percent.
different.
I mean,
You
like
think
as
you
a
think you're unlocking another level of like understanding or appreciation or processing in person?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's also a lot about therapy that isn't just verbal, right? So being in person, being able to read someone's nonverbals, to see their body language, that's a huge part of what we do. So being able to practice that, see that, feel that with other people, I definitely feel like that enhanced my expertise and just like my ability to do what I do to uh,
The best
effective
way,
sort of
yeah, sure.
level.
Yeah, the best way
Um,
you could, right.
yeah, the best way I could. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I definitely think also it's just who you are in the room. Some people just aren't comfortable online, right? They don't feel like themselves. Um, I happen to be like a very, you know, like person to person. I'm very person centered. Like I
Mhm.
enjoy sitting across from someone and leaning in and asking more
Yes.
questions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You could do that. By the way, you could do that. I have noticed you could do that on FaceTime too. Like when I've done some podcasts, I've done them on the phone, like just recording like this, or I've done it with video. And when I try to get that person more engaged, I'll lean in or I'll use my hands to like the gesture, like to keep on going or to nod along and and encourage them and use all my body language even through Zoom. And you could definitely see
Yeah,
when people are like are getting positively impacted by it or not. If I cross my arms and lean
right.
back, it's a little bit, it turns down the conversation a notch.
Right. I mean, the eye contact is so important too. And you almost have to exaggerate what you do online so that people can feel it through the screen.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
I almost feel like it takes a little bit more energy, but it's still effective.
Do you have to switch your therapist hat on and off, or is it just who you are now?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, it's a both and kind of situation, right? So I feel like so much of who I am is intertwined with my therapy voice, my therapy brain.
Hmm.
And also like there is a bit of a switch that turns down. The dial kind of gets switched down a little bit once, I'm in my own sort of world, my own life. And I think that's a healthy thing that you need to do as a therapist, right? You can't constantly be on. It would be just too exhausting. And there needs to be some kind of separation between, your work and your personal life. Those two realities are sometimes really closely intertwined, and it can be difficult to detangle them.
What do you
But
do? What are some tools that you use to do that? Like, do you have to just like
well,
snap out of it, or does your husband does your husband say like you're being a therapist to me? Like, what happens?
sometimes he'll catch me. He'll be like, "Don't therapize right now." But no, I mean, I think something that you do like as a professional, right, in order to kind of make sense of everything, because sometimes you're people are offloading to you, right? Like they're sharing some really deep, difficult things, and at the end of the day, I'm a human being, so one of the ways that helps me to kind of compartmentalize is like making sure I've done everything I can before I've checked out the door, right, of my office or my work or online, whatever it might be. And that can include like consulting with colleagues or with supervisors, making sure that I've done everything that I need to do, essentially, to make sure that support was provided.
Hmm.
And then I think beyond that, I have to kind of do a little bit of a check-in with myself and say, all right, the workday is done. Now I'm going to rejoin my own life, the people in my own life. And I'm going to show up for them as me and not as the therapist. And it can be hard sometimes to make that switch. But I
It
think some of the
is.
things that can help is like quite literally doing something different that you weren't doing before. So if you have like a long commute, for example, putting on some music, right? Just you need a separation. You just need a change in the environment in your senses to kind of help you get back to baseline, and get to where you want to be mentally, right?
Yeah.
So something like that might even be it, right? A workout, coming back, seeing my daughter and having her come and give me the biggest hug, right, is kind of like
So cute.
revitalizing.
She
You mentioned
hugs.
earlier when you held your son, right? And like
Yeah.
how different that feeling was. It's kind of the same when the kids show up, it just something switches, right? Your
Right.
attention is on that.
Yeah, yeah. I guess you return to your I guess your identity shifts, like your awareness of your identity or I guess what part of your identity you're kind of working with at the moment is like triggered back to mom, mom, wife,
Mhm.
daughter, whatever, sibling, whatever, friend, whatever it is, opposed to just therapist.
Yeah.
So what was it like being in school and pregnant at the same time? Because Rachel did that, and
Oh my gosh.
everyone in her school, thought she was insane that she was coming to clinicals when she was 9 months pregnant, just like popping. She's buying new sized what do you call it, scrubs every like month, and
Uh-huh.
and they're like, how old are you? She's like 23, and they're like, what are you doing here right now? Why are you in school? Why are you in clinicals? Why are you pregnant all at one time? What's going on? And she's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm fine. I could just do it. So, but it was, I mean, obviously it wasn't, the easiest thing. She was always exhausted and, I mean, but I think it was actually, I mean, for her, at least for the first pregnancy that she had, I think keeping her, her being busy was actually really productive and healthy for her in the sense that like
Mhm.
she wasn't, until now, like if she was just in class, then she'd go to a couple of classes for a couple hours a week, and be home and do homework and study and just think about being, how big she was for, for the rest of the day. And I think that, having something else, to do with herself was actually more beneficial for her.
I have to agree. I feel like at the time that I was pregnant with my daughter, um, being
At what point in school
super
were you in?
busy. So I was good point. So I was in my third year of my grad school, my doctoral program. So
Out of
basically,
four.
I was wrapping up classes, and I was about to defend my dissertation. I was working on like the last couple chapters. That takes a lot of work, a lot of time. It's super mind numbing, but I had to do it, and I knew that I think I was about 8 months pregnant. It was summer, finished all my classes, was about to defend my dissertation, and I knew that I had to get it done before the baby came. I just knew that it was nothing was going to actually like go out into the world and get published if the baby was there. I just wouldn't be able to concentrate, and I was probably right.
Sure.
So I really hunkered down. I really worked myself hard, got everything I could done, and actually it's funny because even though I was pregnant, I think I was one of the first few people to defend their dissertations in my program, like in that same cohort. But I
Sure.
really knew that I had to get as much as I could off my plate so that I wouldn't have to worry about it once baby was here. So, defended my dissertation, really kept me busy, kept my mind completely engaged.
Can I quickly
And
ask? I'm sorry.
then,
What goes
sure.
into defending it? What, I
Yeah.
never heard of that expression before.
Yeah, so basically when you write a dissertation, that's one part of it. And then there's an actual oral defense. So you have a panel of people who you select. One of them is going to be your chair, so it's usually a faculty member who has worked with you on this project throughout your entire graduate school experience. They've kind of overseen things and supported you along the way. And then there's usually one or maybe two other people who are part of the committee, and that could be another faculty member that you have a relationship with or who you feel would have some kind of expertise in the area that you're working on, and they might be able to kind of provide more support or perspective. So I had two people on my committee, my dissertation chair, and then another faculty member who I was close with and who also had an extensive background in working with children, adolescents, and families. So it made a lot of sense for my topic, which was exploring the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on adolescent mental health. So basically, you have to write like it could be hundreds of pages. It could be just over 100 pages. I think my dissertation was probably like close to 150, 170 with like
Whoa.
appendices. So yeah, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. You're
I
data
can't
crunching, you're
imagine doing that.
analyzing.
How do you do that? How do you write
Yeah.
170 pages?
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, the good part of all this was that my program had you working on your dissertation the very first year that you were in school. So I got a lot of the kind of background research done during the first 2 years. And then the third year was when I kind of had to do a lot of the analysis and the writing of the results, and kind of like the conclusions of the dissertation. Like, why is this important? Why am I sharing this with the community, right, at large? What impact is this going to make on the world? So a lot of that kind of happened at the end. And that's the part that I think you really have to spend a lot of time on, because you have to prove that what you did was actually useful. Um,
Right.
and so, yeah, I mean, you write all of this and then you have to basically give like an oral presentation of everything that you did. So, slideshow presentation, you go over every single part, you kind of summarize other things, and then the panel, your committee, will then give you like a passing grade, or they might say, you didn't do enough at this part, so you have to do more research here, you have to do more work there, and then come back to us and give us like the edited version.
Does that
Sometimes in
happen
a
a
worst
lot?
case scenario, you have to do it all over again.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that's like intense. Thankfully,
Does that
that was
happen often
not my
though?
experience. What was that?
Does that happen often, or how often do people have to go back and make revisions and stuff? Is that like frequent?
I think it's not uncommon that people will have commentary, because again, a lot of the feedback they'll give you, when you're doing your dissertation defense, is just stuff that's going to make your dissertation stronger. So they might
Right.
say,
Sure.
"Hey, this could be another thing that you look at, and that would really beef up this part of your dissertation. It would make it seem more interesting or more relatable, or maybe this is
Mm-hmm.
something that's useful for you to consider, right? Since you're on this topic." Some of the stuff is really technical, right? Like your references weren't in order. You need to go back and fix this, right? And then there are sort of like the situations that are a little bit more extreme, where they're like, you really failed to meet the requirements in order for us to pass you, and that
Oof.
requires more extensive work. Yeah,
Yeah, that's an oof. Okay, so what was
yeah,
your
that's a
defense
big.
like? So you were eight. So you were 8 months pregnant when you defended your dissertation.
I was about 7, 8 months pregnant. Yeah. So I was nearing the end of my third trimester, super uber pregnant, really exhausted, dealing with like so much back pain.
Sorry. Did you get
And
sciatica?
I did. I
Oh
had
my
sciatica from like the
gosh.
get go. So I
Oh,
had
it's
it my
so
whole pregnancy.
terrible.
So
I'm
terrible.
sorry.
So terrible. No, that's
Yeah.
okay. I was in physical therapy like twice a week and that helped, but it was tough. It was definitely tough. Yeah, so just kind of like dealing with all that. Also, you're not sleeping well, that far into pregnancy. Just everything feels uncomfortable, but you have to be professional. And, I think I had great, great people on my committee. They really were super supportive and understanding. And I had a great chairperson who was like, constantly giving me feedback, constantly helping me to like push the project along and make sure that it was in as good shape as it could be, so
Right.
that I didn't have so much to do when they gave me feedback. So that was super helpful.
That's awesome. That's really, really amazing. So you defended your dissertation, and then a month later you give birth, and you're like, I want to start. Yeah, I want to change the focus of what I'm working on, or what my career where my career is heading.
So not exactly. So actually I started internship in August. So that was my final kind of year requirement of training, and it's full time. And then I was supposed to give birth in October, and I ended up
Okay.
giving birth 3.5 weeks early. So
Okay.
I literally showed up to internship. I did like all the HR trainings online the first 2 weeks, and then went into labor.
Oh
And I
gosh.
went into labor the day before Erev Yom Kippur.
Oh my
So
God.
it was very stressful. But I went into labor. It's funny, my family at the time, they were all overseas in Morocco doing this like back to your roots trip. And my mom had to fly back from the trip just so that she could
Whoa.
be there with me. Because they weren't expecting that I was going to deliver so early.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And so my mom showed up well, she didn't make it to the delivery. I delivered on a
I was gonna say
Saturday.
the odds of her making it don't seem super high. Doing it for coming
Yeah,
back from
yeah, yeah.
Morocco.
She was not able to make it in time, but she showed up on Sunday afternoon. She came back from the airport, packed a bag of tons of food, brought it to the hospital room for me to eat, and then she and Barry proceeded to fast for like the next 25 hours.
Oh
So
man.
that was my birth experience. But
Wow.
yeah, I texted my supervisor and I was like, not coming into work on Monday.
Yeah.
I'm in the
So
hospital.
funny. How much time did you get off from that?
They were great about it. They offered me like 14 weeks. I think I took most of it. I took like 13 weeks off.
Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah.
I'm all about
Yeah.
using all that time that anyone gives you. You know, like I know I have a bunch of friends, and I guess they do it more for paternity than maternity leave. But you know, they're like, "Oh yeah, we had 8 weeks off, and I only took two of them." I'm like, "Why?" I don't know. I mean, I feel
Mhm.
like you know, I personally, you know, I teach and do sales, so I don't have much time. I could take off, but my wife, I think my wife had off like 2.5 weeks. I think
Wow.
she had a while, but they let her do her clinic. Oh, what happened was she did her classes online, and then they let her make up her clinical hours, which they don't typically do. They let her make it up the next semester. So even though she was doing more clinicals at that point, you know, the baby was already a couple months old, and I was already able to be home with him and really hang out and help out. But they were also very accommodating. It was really great.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's I definitely didn't go into it thinking I would take as much time as I did. I think I told my supervisor, "Yeah, I'm going to be in and out. Like I'll be back in 6 weeks." And she looked me straight in the eye and she said, "Nah, I don't believe it for a second." and but I was committed. I was like, I will not let the fact that I had a child get in the way of me finishing internship and doing what I need to do and moving on with my life and my career. And then I quickly learned that parenthood is not as simple as I made it out to be, and postpartum
Hmm.
is not as simple as I made it out to be. And so I ended up taking as much time as I could, and I came back part time. And I remember, when I asked, when I after that 6 week mark, and I checked in with her, and she's like, "So how's it going?" I'm like, "Great, and I'm not coming back to work anytime soon." And she's like, "Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought."
That's so
Um,
funny.
Yeah,
It's
she
so
was more
funny.
realistic than I was, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Do so from a therapist perspective, when like I know that typically you got like therapists aren't supposed to offer direct advice or opinions, right?
Mhm.
For the most part, I think. But so if you have let's say a woman that's expecting or a couple that's expecting, and they sit down across to me. They're like, we're gonna like, and like basically the same thing that you just said to your director. Like, oh yeah, we'll be, you know, I'll be in and out, done in 5 weeks. Like at that point, do you say, hey, like, let's have this conversation about this, or do you just ask them, or how do you proceed to deal with that? Like when you know that there's advice that you should be, or that you know something that they don't know, how do you go about getting them that information?
Right. I think that's a great question. And for me, there's a difference between advice giving and what we call psychoeducation. So, what I mean by that is advice would be like, I don't think that was like the best choice. Like, this is, what you really should do. And psychoeducation is not that. It's basically having the conversation, like you're saying, about what the options are and what are the risks and benefits, and allowing that
Mm.
other person to come to their own conclusion about what makes
Ah,
the most sense for that.
I gotcha.
So really it's just giving the information and kind of saying like, hey, that might work out for you, great. And we also know that sometimes complications can happen. Maybe you
Ah,
might need more
gotcha. So
time,
you just
right?
show them the rest of the
This is
menu.
something
You
to
show them all the
consider.
options.
Exactly, exactly. You want people to know what they're walking into as much as you can. And also there are things we can't, you know, we
Think
can't
of.
predict
Yeah,
exactly. So it's helpful to at least introduce the conversation and say, well, what if it didn't work out the way you expected? What then? Right? What are some things that we can think about that might be helpful to you? That might be able to make it into your plan just in case so that you feel prepared, right?
sure, sure. So yeah, some of the most fun conversations or fun things, you know, experiences I've ever had, or most important. Forget about fun, but like some of the most important conversations were always, you know, with people that offered me you know, something on the menu that I didn't even know existed before, you know, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was I didn't even know that that was like a thing. I didn't even know I should be thinking about that. And you know, and then when
Mhm.
I did, I'm like, it opens up like a whole new door of reality, a whole new perception, and I'm like, I'm so happy that you brought that up because I wouldn't have, I never would have dreamt of even, you know. acknowledging it or considering it, and
Hmm.
you kind of
Right.
get ahead of the game like that.
Right. Sometimes it's not about giving all the answers. I think in therapy, sometimes it's more about asking the better questions, right? What are the best questions that we can pose? And, what do people do with that? What sort of avenues, what sort of thoughts does that spur, for someone? And that allows people to think more deeply. That allows them to think and consider other solutions, other possibilities. And then they can arrive to their own decisions. Right. So we don't make the decisions for anyone in therapy. We don't make the suggestions, but we do offer recommendations, we do offer support, we do offer psychoeducation, and we offer questions to get people thinking more deeply.
Right, right. I guess it's also probably, I mean, just think in terms of everyday life. That's usually the best way to get people to think about things, is not to tell them anything, is to ask them and let them come up with the answer themselves. Like I was talking to my
Mm,
dad the other day, and I was like, so like, and I've been trying to get him to be healthy forever. To work out more, to eat more, to just eat better rather, to move more, and like I always tell him that, and he always just yas me to death, which I don't blame him for, and because no one wants to hear that over and over every time they talk to their kid who they work with every day of the week. So so
right.
so I changed it up. I was like, how do you find that you sleep well? Do you find that you have a lot of energy throughout the day? And like, and then I started just asking him questions rather than giving him statements and telling him what to do. And it just leads to such healthier, such a healthier dynamic and a lot more open. And then he ends
Hmm.
up saying things himself that's coming from himself, even though that's what I want him to get. And he got there himself. And then, when it comes out of your own mouth, it's like, oh, whoa, I didn't even realize that was what the case was. Like sometimes just having to say it yourself opens it all up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when in doubt, lead with curiosity, right?
That's a
That
great, yeah,
is
that's
the
a great
best thing
quote.
you can do.
That's a great quote. When in doubt, lead with
I don't think it's
curiosity.
me originally. It's definitely someone else, but
No,
it works.
definitely.
It does
Yeah,
help.
yeah, yeah. No, it's great. It's great. So how'd you ultimately do the switch? So was it a direct consequence of your giving birth experience and your whole journey, or was it before that, or was it a combination of the two?
I think it might have been a combination of the two. I don't think at the point that I was going through, pregnancy or trying to start a family and having different experiences around that I was thinking so much about what this must be like for others. I was just really stuck in, wow, like this is happening to me and my experience. But then I think once my daughter arrived and I had to balance being a mom and also, pursuing a career and a career at like a very advanced level, that I really started grappling with the questions of like, how do people do this? Right? Like, how
Right.
are other people managing in the world and navigating all of this stress and challenge and obstacles? And it helped me to, I think, see things a little differently. I grew up with a mom who had very strong feminist ideals, who believed like I could do all things, and she was, again, not wrong.
Yeah.
I could do a lot of things, and I don't think that takes away from the fact that this can be a really hard experience. It's not easy. It's not simple. And I wondered a lot about other women and how they were going through it. And I remember like asking friends, like,
Yeah.
how are you doing this? How are you going through this? And people would say like it's so hard, right? There are things that help, but this is really difficult, this aspect or that aspect. And I'm like, well, why is it that nobody talks about this when you are pregnant or when you're starting a family, but only once you've already had your baby,
Yeah.
right? Or
It's
when
like do the
you're far
preventative
enough
work
along
that you
and
talked about earlier.
exactly, exactly. Like, why isn't this a conversation? Why don't they have classes on how to, support
You should
yourself through this
start
time? And
that. That
what's
would be awesome. Can you do that?
well, it's funny, right? Like it's funny that I say that because there actually are classes, right? Until I got to my job, I didn't realize that, like our hospital does offer, classes to support people and provide them with education on the postpartum experience. And I'm like, well, where was this when I was pregnant, right?
Yeah.
Like, how did
Yeah.
I not know about this? And I think that's what, I was kind of honing in on before, is that people just don't talk about it enough. Like, there's the resources are there, the support is there, but people don't know that they can turn to it. And so in the end, they kind of just suffer alone, which is really sad and really unfortunate. It doesn't have to be that way. So I
And
think
even worse,
these,
if they don't have the
Mhm.
tools, then they're suffering alone without the tools of how to balance it. That's it's,
Right,
it's not just a struggle. It's, because it's one thing to struggle if you just know how to, if you know, okay, these are the tools that I have to use to get through, and today's hard, but tomorrow will be okay. And then there's the today's hard, and I have no idea how tomorrow is going to be better, and that's like a
exactly,
totally different challenge.
exactly. Yeah, and then other people around you might not necessarily know how to make it better either. They might not know how to support you or recommend you to different resources, right? So it's not just like the individual who feels helpless, right? But it's also anyone who might be supporting them, another caregiver, a partner, a husband, a wife, right? Your spouse, right? They want to know how to support you too, and support themselves. They're going through this journey alongside you, and it can be really hard. So, yeah, I think just all these questions that were coming up for me made me wonder more. And I'm the kind of person that once I have a question in my mind, once I have like an interest, a curiosity, I really need to pursue it.
It's awesome.
And
It's such a great
so
trait.
I was at a yeah, I was at a place where I was looking for a postdoctoral fellowship, which would be kind of the last leg of me, completing everything I need to do in order to get licensed as a psychologist. And I happened to get an email from an old professor, who kind of periodically sends emails out about different opportunities for people. And I saw this like cross my email, this opportunity, and just like, wow, that sounds so cool. And like, there's no way, these people would hire me because I don't have the background experience,
Uh-huh.
like the technical experience in this. And then the wire was kind of coming down, and I needed to really decide what I was going to do. And so, I said, I'm just going to go for it. What's the worst thing that they'll say? No, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's fine.
definitely.
I'll just
Right.
shoot my shot. And I did. And I got an interview, and I was like, wow. And then I met with the director of the program. And in that one interview, that one conversation, I learned so much and felt so validated in so many different on so many different levels of experience that I had as a mom, that I was like, yes, this feels like such a good fit. I want this. I want this more than I thought I did. And then was lucky enough and fortunate enough to be accepted into this opportunity. So started out, and I'm still very new to this part of the field, if I'm being honest, but it's
Sure.
really so rewarding and so wonderful to be working alongside people who have this knowledge, have this expertise, and I'm just trying to take as much as I can from this experience and share it
Yeah,
share it with everyone
definitely. Do
else.
you have I'll ask you a last question, I'll let you go for the afternoon because you have a family and it's a Sunday. But last what do you envision in 10 years that you hope to accomplish, that you'd want to be at, or do you have any kind of aspirations that are, with your, I guess, practice or career or anything like that, that you think you want to get you'd want to get to?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I've always really enjoyed about academia is being able to learn from others and then pass along what I know to those who are just starting out. So, in 10 years, I think my dream would be to be in a position to help other people who are getting their start in this field, whether that's through mentorship, being a professor,
Sure. Awesome. That'd be
teaching
so
in some
cool.
way.
Yeah.
That would be really wonderful. And then beyond that, I really want to be a contributor in making conversations like these more public, just bringing more awareness to some of these topics, because even in our own community, it's not really something that's talked about. So
Sure. Sure.
I'm hoping that I can have an impact in that way.
Awesome. That sounds like great goals. Well, as soon as I start getting millions of listeners, I'll bring you back on, and we'll do this all over again, and then we
I
can
would
really
love to.
blast open the doors of those conversations. But until then, this is so much fun, and I really appreciate you making the time. Thank you so much, Ruth. Um,
Of course. Thank
and
you.
Doctor,
Thanks for having me.
and yeah, this is such a blast. And congratulations, really, on everything, and send love to Barry and the baby, and I guess I'll get him on soon, also,
You
and
should.
this is
He's
tons of fun. We'll
great.
do this again. I know, I'm so excited. I was so
Absolutely.
excited for that. I'm so excited for both of these. It's gonna be awesome. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Thank
Okay.
you. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Have a good
Okay.
one. Take care. Bye.